Some Hollywood stories quietly disappear with time, while others return years later with a weight that can no longer be ignored. Demi Moore's story belongs to the second kind. When she met Ashton Kutcher in 2003, she was rebuilding herself after a painful divorce, while he was a rising star full of charm and optimism. Their connection felt instant and intoxicating, built on long conversations, laughter, and the promise of starting over. To the outside world, they looked fearless, modern, and deeply in love. Their age difference became a symbol of breaking rules, not a warning sign. They blended families, built careers together, and presented themselves as proof that love could defy expectations. Yet behind the glossy red carpet images, Demi was carrying emotional weight she hadn't yet learned how to name. What appeared to be a miracle romance was quietly shaped by unspoken fears, unresolved grief, and a desire to be chosen at any cost. The fairy tale existed, but it rested on fragile ground. The loss that changed everything. Before their marriage ever reached its happiest moments, tragedy had already carved a deep scar into Demi's heart. The miscarriage she suffered during the relationship became a turning point she would carry silently for years. Losing a child she had already imagined and named shattered her sense of safety and control. Grief didn't arrive neatly. It crept in through guilt, self-blame, and unanswered questions. Demi later admitted she turned her pain inward, wondering if she had failed in ways no one else could see. While Ashton processed the loss differently, Demi felt herself sinking into emotional isolation. The tragedy didn't just take away a future she dreamed of. It quietly altered how she saw herself as a woman and a partner. Instead of healing together, distance began to grow between them. What the world never saw was how this loss became the first crack in the foundation of their marriage. A wound left exposed without the language or support needed to truly heal. Carrying the marriage alone. As time passed, Demi became increasingly focused on holding the relationship together, even as her sense of self began to blur. She believed love meant adaptability, sacrifice, and endurance. In trying to meet expectations she didn't fully share, she slowly placed her own boundaries second. What began as compromise turned into emotional exhaustion. Demi later reflected that she was so afraid of losing the marriage that she ignored the cost of losing herself. This wasn't about dramatic arguments or public conflict, but about quiet moments where her voice felt smaller and her needs less important. Ashton's growing independence and changing priorities only deepened her insecurity. The partnership began to feel uneven, with Demi doing the emotional labor to preserve what once felt effortless. In protecting the image of their marriage, she protected his reputation more than her own well-being. This invisible imbalance became one of the heaviest burdens she carried. The silence that consumed her. Behind closed doors, Demi's internal struggle intensified. The pressure to appear strong, modern, and unbothered weighed heavily on her mental health. Old patterns she had once overcome began to resurface, not from recklessness, but from pain left unattended. Addiction didn't arrive suddenly. It crept back through moments of loneliness and self-doubt. As she struggled privately, the emotional gap in her marriage widened. Communication faded, replaced by assumptions and avoidance. Demi later acknowledged that she felt emotionally abandoned, long before the relationship officially ended. Her daughters noticed the change, sensing a sadness that no public success could hide. The woman they knew seemed distant, fragile, and overwhelmed. Demi wasn't just fighting a marriage in trouble. She was fighting the fear that she no longer recognized herself. The silence she maintained to keep everything together ultimately became the thing that pulled everything apart. The betrayal that ended the illusion. When the truth finally surfaced, it did so publicly and painfully. Discovering betrayal through headlines rather than honesty shattered what little stability Demi had left. The humiliation wasn't just about broken trust. It was about realizing how long she had been holding on to a version of the marriage that no longer existed. The explanations that followed only deepened the wound, leaving her questioning whether her sacrifices had been misunderstood or dismissed entirely. For Demi, this moment wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was the collapse of an identity she had shaped around keeping it alive. Standing beside Ashton in public during this period required a strength she no longer possessed. Behind the composed exterior was a woman unraveling under pressure, grief, and exhaustion. When she finally chose separation, it wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of survival. The fall that nearly took everything, the end of the marriage didn't bring immediate freedom. It brought a devastating collapse. Demi's long-fought sobriety slipped away as grief, shame, and public scrutiny collided. Her health deteriorated rapidly, fueled by extreme behaviors rooted in self-punishment rather than vanity. What followed was a frightening descent that alarmed everyone around her. Hospitalization marked a moment where denial was no longer possible. More painful than the physical consequences was the emotional fallout with her daughters. They watched their mother disappear into someone they couldn't recognize, and distance became necessary for their own protection. Birthdays passed without contact. Milestones went unshared. Demi later described this period as the loneliest chapter of her life. The woman who once defined strength now faced the reality that survival required surrender. Surrender to help, honesty, and the long road back to herself. Rebuilding from the ashes recovery didn't arrive quickly or neatly. It came through uncomfortable truth, therapy, and the humility of starting again. Rehab addressed the addiction, but rebuilding trust, especially with her daughters, took years. The reconnection began slowly, led by honesty rather than excuses. Demi learned to listen without defending herself, and to acknowledge the pain her absence had caused. This process reshaped her understanding of accountability and love. Healing became less about fixing the past and more about showing up differently in the present. As she stepped back into public life, she did so with caution, no longer willing to sacrifice her well-being for approval. The silence she once used to protect others was replaced with clarity and self-respect. For the first time, Demi wasn't performing resilience. She was practicing it. And that made all the difference. Speaking the truth without blame. When Demi finally shared her story publicly, it wasn't driven by revenge or bitterness. It was driven by the need to reclaim her narrative. She spoke openly about how fear of abandonment led her to compromise her identity, and how silence became a form of self-erasure. The truth wasn't about one person's failures, but about the emotional dynamics that shaped their relationship. Even Ashton later acknowledged the pain they both carried. Time softened the anger, allowing space for mutual respect and unexpected maturity. Demi's willingness to speak honestly didn't destroy her past, it freed her from it. By naming what she endured, she released herself from shame. The truth became a bridge to healing rather than a weapon. For Demi, this was the final step in choosing herself without apology. Choosing wholeness at 62. At 62, Demi Moore stands in a place she once couldn't imagine. Her relationships with her daughters are restored, her sense of self rebuilt on honesty instead of fear. She speaks now with clarity, not because the past no longer hurts, but because it no longer defines her. Love, she learned, should never require self-disappearance. Her story isn't about exposing secrets. It's about understanding how easily strength can turn into self-sacrifice when boundaries fade. By choosing truth, Demi reclaimed the parts of herself she once abandoned in the name of love. Her journey reminds us that healing isn't linear, and reinvention has no age limit. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is stop protecting a story that no longer protects them, and in doing so, finally come home to themselves.